Hello everybody, this is Bird Brain. We're here, we are nerdy for the birdies. So the Philadelphia Eagles are working through the offseason. We are vastly approaching free agency, but before we really look forward to the future, let's look back on the 2024 offseason one more time and really acknowledge the job that Howie Roseman did. So what I've decided to do is another grades video, but it's less a reflection of the players and the positions themselves, and more based on the moves that Howie Roseman made to turn the Philadelphia Eagles from a spiraling, crumbling team into a Super Bowl champion in one offseason. So I have it basically put into groups, mostly in order of when they happened. And it'll make sense. So we have reserve contracts, key releases, re-signings, extensions / restructures, free agency, the draft, and then trades. So with that, let's start with our reserve contracts. So for those of you who don't know, when the regular season ends and we move to the playoffs, as teams get eliminated, the practice squad gets eliminated. Teams now will then have a 90-man roster that they'll begin to build. And you'll see, for example, a team put out that teams have signed X players to futures contracts. That's something you hear a lot in the NFL. You hear it happens every year for every team, and it's usually just guys that were on your practice squad. You might sign a few guys that are outside the building. It's a good thing to do because, you never know. It's a nice, cheap way to find talent that if they make the roster, cool. If they don't, whatever. It's no real serious money put into it. So I wanted to name the 4 players that the Eagles had on signed to reserve contracts. There was more than 4, but these were 4 that managed to make the roster and contribute. Thomas Booker, Tristan McCullum, E.J. Jenkins, and Darian Kennard, and I gave them grades. I gave Thomas Booker a B, Tristan McCullum a C, along with E.J. Jenkins, and then Darian Kennard a C+. So not the most flattering grades. Overall, I gave this group a C+, but these were depth pieces that took snaps in games and were needed. Thomas Booker took some snaps, more so earlier on in the season, and he played a rotational role for quite a bit of time. Tristan McCullum had to come into games due to injury, and while he wasn't the best safety for the team, he still was there doing his job. E.J. Jenkins was, at points in the seasons, the 3rd tight end. He scored a touchdown in the season finale. Darian Kennard was a backup offensive lineman. So they had depth on this roster, and if you can find pieces like that just floating around, like if you can get anything out of a futures reserve contract guy, you feel pretty good about that. Moving on, we're going to talk about key releases, and I have 2 here that were documented. Kevin Byard and Avonte Maddox. Now, Avonte Maddox we have starred because Avonte was on the team this year, but I am going to give the releases obviously an A grade because I think it was a smart move to release both players and why they did. The Eagles did release Avonte before free agency, and then they brought him back on a new deal, and I'll talk about that on the re-signings. But I think, it was a good move to let him go because the contract that he would be playing at, I think the team kind of knew he most likely wouldn't be a starter or couldn't be relied on to be a starter, and I think they were going to make plans to try to attack that position with other players, guys that you feel more comfortable playing in his place, given how much time he missed in 2023. So they knew that he would have to either rework his contract or something else. So he was released. He was in free agency for a bit, and then the Eagles brought him back, and we'll talk about that in a sec. They released Kevin Byard as well, and I think this was a good move as well. Kevin Byard used to be like a Pro Bowl caliber safety. He was really good, but he wasn't great with the Eagles, and I looked up his stats, comparing his time with the Eagles to the Bears this year, and his stats didn't really get much better. He allowed over 100 passer rating, high completion percentage. He just wasn't that good. The Eagles had better safeties. I mean, I'll say this: CJ wasn't great in the red zone, but I still think he was much better. He was much better playing the ball. He had more picks. more pass deflections, stuff like that. So it was definitely a better move to replace him and get a cheaper contract in the building with TJ to save yourself a bit of money. Moving on, we have re-signings. So we have Brandon Graham, Braden Mann, Rick Lovato, and Avonte Maddox. Now I mentioned we have re-signings, but I also mentioned we have extensions. The difference between the two is a re-signing is a player that either was in free agency because the team cut them and then re-signed them to the team, or a player that would be in free agency if the team did not re-sign them. There's a difference between that and getting extension. So an extension is like there's still years left on your contract, but you got more money. So Brandon Graham, A+. One, because he was relatively cheap, but he was a really key defensive player for a lot of the season until he obviously tore his tricep. But he was a great player. You know, I remember the Rams game especially. He was playing his heart out, and he had a really good game until he was injured. He made some key defensive stops at points in the season. I remember against the Browns, he had a really smart tackle on a reverse, you know, stuff like that. Braden Mann, pretty solid punter. He wasn't the best kickoff guy down the stretch, but I thought he was a really good punter overall for this team. Pretty solid. Rick Lovato, it's hard to kind of grade a long snapper. You know, he had a little bit of a rough Super Bowl performance with some of those penalties, but other than that, he was pretty solid all year. Avonte Maddox, I gave a C+. Now, the signing was good itself. It's just, you know, Avonte is a harder player to grade, and a lot of this is more reflective on when he played earlier in the season. I mean, he was not playing well. He was very much a liability on the field. Teams were picking on him when they were throwing. And a play that's like burned in my mind is against Tampa. He has a very, I wouldn't say easy because Chris Godwin's not an easy guy to tackle, but he's got Chris Godwin in the open field, and this should be a tackle that a veteran should make, and he missed. And he didn't just miss the tackle, I mean, he completely missed the player. He missed Chris Godwin. Godwin gets a first down, and then that nightmare continued. So I wasn't really a big fan of the way Maddox was playing. As he got to the reserve role, playing more on special teams, we start to see him make more splash plays. And I think that's why that this grade isn't lower. I think a C+ is fair, considering that he eventually kind of accepted his role, being the reserve, not playing the starter. We didn't hear him complain about it, and that's fine. Now we get to the extensions. The extensions I gave an overall A. So the players that were extended: Landon Dickerson, Jake Elliott, Josh Sweat, Reed Blankenship, Jordan Mailata, Devontae Smith, and A.J. Brown. So this technically includes a restructure because Josh Sweat wasn't extended, he was restructured, but I didn't really feel like doing my own section for Josh Sweat because I think that was really the only contract they did restructure last year. Landon Dickerson I gave an A+ signing to, because you gave him top of the, you know, they got ahead of the guard market. They knew that boom was coming. A lot of guards got highly paid. And as of today, he was the highest paid left guard. Trey Smith just accepted the franchise tag, so now he makes more. But to get Landon under contract like that was big, to keep him on this offensive line, and especially for as well as he played this year. I mean, he was one of the best guards in the league, period. Jake Elliott, I gave a B. It would be lower, but if the rumors are true that Jake Elliott was dealing with an injury, you know, you can maybe excuse some of the kicking performance. And the fact of the matter is, I don't think the decision to extend Jake Elliott was wrong, because Jake Elliott was coming off of a really good season, made some really big kicks for this team. He had the game winner for overtime. He set up overtime in the Bills game. So it made logical sense to give him the contract. I just think that it didn't pay its dividends this year, but we'll see if that continues. Josh Sweat, A-. If it was based on the Super Bowl, it'd probably be an A+, but if you talk about the season, it was very up and down. Like, I would say towards the middle of the season, Sweat really got going, and then he kind of quieted down, and then he got going again once we got to the playoffs. So a lot of credit is due there. Reed Blankenship, another A, just a really good defensive player. So Reed was an undrafted free agent, so you would have had to extend him an extra year. And given the season he just had, I think he would definitely command a bit, you know, not a ton of money, but some money on the open market. So I think, like, now, if you had to worry about re-signing him, I think that would be a bit of a question. Jordan Mailata, you locked down arguably the best left tackle in the league last year. Before that, and you got him paid, so if you were to pay him now, it'd be a lot more. Devontae Smith, A+ again, because if you look at the wide receiver 2 market, not even wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 market, you know, these guys are starting to make close to $30 million. You got Devontae at $25 million. So that's looking like a steal. And then, because Devontae and AJ for a moment were making the same amount, extending AJ was good. Because even though he got extended, he's still making a lot less than some of the top receivers. I mean, Lord knows what Jamar Chase is going to make, but you got AJ under contract for an average of about $29 million up until like 2029. So you lock down a lot of your key players, at least for this season, but beyond that, I mean, with the exception of Reed and Josh Sweat, a lot of these guys are going to be on the team for the foreseeable future. And now we move on to free agency itself. I mean, it just goes to show you how much goes into the offseason before we even get to free agency and the draft. But in free agency, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's all over the place. I gave free agency, though, an A-, because there's varying degrees with all these grades. We'll start off with Bryce Huff, who I gave a D. He got the largest free agency contract for the team this year, and he did not pay off. And it's a really bad sign that he was benched during the Super Bowl. That's not good for someone that you expected to be one of your starting defensive linemen. I still have faith that this signing can look a lot better, and maybe another summer in this defense he could look better. I mean, who knows what they do with him. But it isn't a great sign to start. But that same exact day, you hit it out of the park with 2 great signings in Saquon Barkley and Zach Bond, who were arguably the offensive and defensive players of the year for this team. I mean, Saquon speaks for himself. And the fact that you got Saquon at the price he did, he's not the highest paid running back. And on top of that, not only is he not the highest paid running back, I mean, you look at in terms of just pure NFL like weapons, I mean, the value, I mean, the Jags paid more for Gabe Davis than we are paying for Saquon Barkley. And you got one guy who had 2,000 yards, and then the other guy's Gabe Davis. So, need I say more? Zach Bond, I mean, I would give this signing an A++. I mean, you drafted a potential Defensive Player of the Year candidate. You drafted an All-Pro, or drafted, you signed, you know, an All-Pro. You signed a Pro Bowler for $3.5 million at linebacker. I mean, when Zach Bond was signed, I didn't think much of the signing. I thought he'd be like a depth piece, special teamer, take some snaps at edge. No, like, he became this team, one of this team's best defensive players. And I really hope they do lock him up to a contract, you know, and he doesn't have to leave this building, because I thought he was amazing. Then we had Matt Hennessy, which I gave a D-. I think people had some expectation for him to be in the competition for the right guard battle last year. I think people expected him to stick around and be an offensive lineman. Obviously, he didn't really stick with the team. He just didn't really have a great camp. And, yeah, he ended up not sticking with the Eagles. Then you had Devontae Parker, who ended up retiring, so I gave this an incomplete. Again, they just wanted a depth receiver. I don't really see this as a bad signing or anything like that. He was very dirt cheap, because I remember he'd been released by the Patriots and they'd be picking up most of the tab. So the Eagles had kind of wanted Devontae Parker for a while. They'd kind of been interested in like trades when he was like with the Patriots in Miami, but he never really did anything. So yeah, so I'll give that grade an incomplete. And then get CJGJ, which is an A. And I know at points in the season his play was a little all over the place. I definitely think he got better as the season went on, and I definitely think that you can definitely tell his attitude is very much welcome on this defense. Great player, all in all, just a great guy to have on the team. So A, I think, was very fitting. Then you get Devin White, which I gave an F, and I think it was the reason why I gave Devin White an F versus Bryce Huff is at least Bryce Huff is still on the team and still finished the season. I mean, Devin White was expected to be a starting linebacker. He got the most money out of all the linebackers on this team this year, and he just didn't live up to any expectations. He never really stood out in the summer, and he never started a game. He got cut, went to the Texans. I think he only played in like one game for the Texans. He just doesn't really have it. So we go from one linebacker to another in Oren Burks, and they give him an A. I mean, he played special teams, and when he was called upon to play in the regular season and postseason, he played. And I thought he played, for the most part, pretty well. And again, I'm grading this more as a reserve than I am as just the player itself. I mean, maybe relative to other guys on his team, I would say he was like a B- player, but to get a linebacker that can come in for dirt cheap and play at the level he did, for the most part, is a winning signing. Paris Campbell, I gave a B+. It did seem like he had some decent chemistry with Jalen, and he hung around the team. He didn't really do much this year, but for the most part, again, getting a guy just to have on the roster in case injuries kicked around and whatnot. Someone who, like, he hung around the practice squad a bit. He got in games. He was a decent run blocker. Did some dirty work. Didn't really get a lot of credit. He did catch a touchdown, so give credit where credit was due. But yeah. CJ Uzomah, I gave a C-. I thought, for the most part, again, dirt cheap signings. It's not like it's a bad idea to sign him. He just wasn't really good when he played. Had some blocks here and there, but for the most part, just wasn't much on the field. CJ Uzomah. Oh, sorry, not CJ Uzomah. I just read that one. Mekhi Becton, A+. And I gave it an A+, again, not so much for the play, but for the value. I mean, you got a pretty solid starting right guard for about $5 million, and this was after the draft. This was not during the draft or before March, this was after. And you got a pretty solid guy here to pick up, so I give it credit where credit is due. It's a great pickup. John Ross is a D. I mean, no one really expected much, and he didn't contribute much. I think he had like one catch all year. Nick Gates, C+, just a depth piece, nothing special. Just to make things clear about free agency, so these are like the key free agents the team signed. A lot of these are pre-September, so I didn't include someone like Kari Blasingame, who they would have signed like later on in the year or anything like that. I think it's a little much. I think I was really focusing on the off-season more so than anything they did during the season. And now we move on to the draft, where we have I gave the draft overall a B+. Now, I think this grade can change because draft grades are always constantly changing as these guys develop. So, with the pick of Quinyon Mitchell, I gave it an A. Pretty simple. I thought Quinyon was a pretty, for the value of which they got him, he was an A+ player. He was an A player. He was a great corner. Things slipped up a little bit towards the end of the year. I thought he played pretty well, though, throughout. Yeah, I thought he was just, he didn't play like a rookie this year, I'll say. And when you can get that in the first round, you're pretty good. Now, I gave the pick Cooper DeJean a higher grade of an A+, because one, you got someone who should have been drafted in the first round, if being totally honest, in the second. And two, you got an extremely versatile player. I mean, he played nickel at a level that he was getting Pro Bowl votes as a rookie. He was getting, I think he may have been in contention for All-Pro or something, like some award. I know he had, he was in the Defensive Rookie of the Year convo. He was a finalist for that as well. And he was also a punt returner. He did a lot of different things for this team. And when he started playing, the impact he had on the defense was huge. A strong tackling nickel that was smart, could diagnose plays, and he blew up a lot of fourth downs as well. So I think I gave the grade, I'm going to give him a slightly higher grade. Jalen Hunt, I'm going to give a B, because we didn't see a lot of him earlier on in the season, but then as time went on, we started to see him more, and he's really developing nicely. I'm really excited to see what he does next year for this team. So Jalen Hunt is a B. Will Shipley, B-. So the grades are starting to dip here. A lot of this is just based on the impact they had. He didn't get a lot of work. He had a really nice NFC Championship game. He made some nice catches against the Giants towards the end of the year. But other than that, most of the time he was just coming in garbage time just to kind of clean up a little bit. Nothing crazy. Didn't do too much that was impressive in those moments. So for the most part, can't really give it a high grade. Anaya Smith, C-, and I could probably go lower, but again, injuries impacted him, so I'll be generous. I do hope he gets more involved in the offense next year. I think he does have a very unique skill set. But again, only time will tell. And at this point, this is a 5th round pick. I mean, you don't expect much out of a 5th round wide receiver, but I was expecting maybe a little more. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. I gave a C+. He played a lot of snaps on special teams. Again, relative to what he could have gotten in the 5th round and what he was a fine pick. He just didn't really do a lot this year, so it's harder to give him like a higher grade. Like, I would give an A+ to a 5th round pick if they were like a starter and were like consistently making plays. You know, with Trotter, you know, he was a special teamer and he came in a little bit towards the end of games on defense, so it's really hard to evaluate what he did last year. Trevor Keegan, I gave incomplete just because he was usually inactive on game days, so there's really nothing to judge. Johnny Wilson, a C. Again, I can't go too hard on him because he was a 6th round pick, and at that point, you're just kind of grasping for straws when it comes to talent. But you do expect someone of his size to maybe play to his size a little bit more. I really would like to see him in the offseason study some big receivers, guys like Harold Carmichael, Mike Evans, how they use their bodies, even simply AJ. Like, AJ is not the tallest receiver, but because he's bigger than a lot of corners, you can see how he boxes out a lot of corners and how he creates, you know, opportunities at the catch point. That's the kind of guy, that's the kind of stuff he needs to really study. And if he can do that, along with just simply improving his catching skills, he could become a really good red zone threat. And Dylan McMahon, incomplete because he didn't even make the team. And I don't think it's fair to grade someone who doesn't make the team. And then our last category is trades. So we have 4 trades here for the Eagles. Kenny Pickett, Hassan Reddick, Cooper DeJean, and Jahan Dotson. And trades I gave an overall A-. So let's start with the Kenny Pickett trade. I gave a B. I know a lot of people talk about the value of said trade. So if I remember correctly, the Eagles traded a 3rd and 2 7ths for Kenny Pickett and a 4th round pick. So if you would look on a draft value chart, essentially would value Kenny Pickett at around a 4th round pick. So you basically traded a 3rd and 2 7ths for 2 4th round picks. And look, Kenny Pickett won you a game this year. Kenny Pickett came in off the bench and won football games. So, you know, he may not have been like the best quarterback for this team, but he did what he needed to do to win. So I give it a B. Not like the greatest value trade or a steal, but he got a solid player, so I'd say this is a solid trade. The Hassan Reddick trade, I'm going to give an A, and I know a lot of fans really liked Reddick. I liked Reddick, but so I think this trade often got really misconstrued, and when I thought about it, I finally understood, oh, this is why the Eagles did it. So if you know about comp picks, right, if the Eagles had kept Reddick on the team this year and he had left in free agency, if he had played well enough, the Eagles could have received an extra draft pick called a comp pick or compensatory pick. And the highest that comp pick could be is a 3rd round pick. The Eagles were kind of fielding trade offers, and it seemed like they weren't going to get much for a trade that would yield them high immediate results. So they decided, okay, we're going to trade for this conditional 3rd, and if he does the things we need him to do, we can get, you know, a 2nd round pick. And at bare minimum, we're going to get a 3rd round pick that is like the best case scenario comp pick. So basically how he bet on the comp pick formula. Then you look at Reddick's season. If Hassan Reddick, you know, had the season he had, right, you know, a few tackles and like half a sack, you're not getting anything for that. So the Eagles at least copped some value. So they basically gave themselves a floor, and I give them credit. And, you know, as bad as Bryce Huff was, at least Bryce Huff contributed and actually forced, you know, he forced a turnover in a game. You know, he had a few sacks. He did something. Reddick didn't do anything. And for that reason, don't have anything this year. So I think that's why, like, trading him away amidst this whole contract thing was a smart decision. And then the Cooper DeJean trade, I gave an A+. There's a lot of factors in the trade that I'm not really going to bore you with at this moment in time. But yeah, Cooper DeJean, I mean, to get him and then just consistently keep trading the picks that you got in the trade back again and again, and then you get on top of that to turn that into next year's draft capital, which the Eagles then needed draft capital for next year, really helped them out. So it was a really smart trade. to get Cooper DeJean, and it paid off. And then last but not least, we had the Jahan Dotson trade, which I gave a C+. Giving up a third for Jahan Dotson is too much, but I don't think Jahan Dotson is done in Philly, and I don't think it was that bad of a decision. I think there's just a lot of factors contributed to him not having the season he could, but it seems like now he's got more trust, he understands the system better, so I think he's going to be more involved. So with that, I think that, it's only up from here. So that is my grade of the overall Howie season. So a lot of A's, 1 B+, and then a C. And really, getting a C on the reserve contracts, like, if you get any hits there, it's a good thing. So I don't really consider it that bad of a miss or anything like that. But that's how you build a Super Bowl caliber team. Now, what kind of offseason will Howie have this coming year? Well, we'll see. We're just getting into it. The combine's happening now. Anyway, this is Bird Brain. Hope you guys enjoyed being nerdy for the birdies. Fly Eagles fly. See you around.